Greetings and welcome back to this second mini lecture on federalism. In the first mini lecture, I tried to just give you a basic overview of what federalism is. In this mini lecture, I want to talk about both the advantages and disadvantages of federalism. And I know I will definitely get to the advantages of federalism, and I may have to do the disadvantages in the next mini lecture. And as I mentioned at the tail end of the first mini lecture, don't think of these as right or wrong. I think with federalism, you do get these three advantages, but I think you also pay for it with a cost, and the cost are the three disadvantages of federalism. And this is not an exhaustive list. I put names not because you need to remember those names, but I always try when I can remember who I stole these ideas from. So Sharkansky and Walker were two guys many, many years ago that really liked federalism. Ira Sharkansky wrote a book, God, many years ago called The Maligned States. Jack Walker wrote a path-breaking essay on federalism in the American Political Science Review. If I remember right, between Sharkansky and Walker, they had something like, I don't know, 17 advantages to federalism. But here are the three that I believe are the most important. So the first one, and even critics of federalism, even people who don't like it, will often say, okay, well, if I had to say something good about federalism, it would be that it permits diversity, right? So I gave you some advantages of diversity earlier. Some states have the death penalty, some states do not. Speed limits vary dramatically from state to state. On my 18 state road trip, I ran into speed limits on the highways uh, down at 55 and I think even once 45. And there is a highway in Texas where currently the speed limit is 90. The Supreme Court has ruled that community standards can define what's obscene. And so there is not one obscenity standard for the country. And if you want to think about this, think about the city of San Francisco, where very, very little is obscene, and then go to Salt Lake City, where standards involving decency and public morality are very, very different than in the city of San Francisco. Doesn't mean San Francisco's right or wrong, or Salt Lake City's right or wrong. Different standards for different people who live there. And there are a whole variety of ways that states are different. Some have provisions for direct democracy, like California. We have three distinct provisions for direct democracy, including the initiative, referendum, and recall. Some states, especially in the South, don't have any, for example. The second, and some would say this is the same thing, but not really, that federalism permits innovation. So Louis Brandeis, who was a Supreme Court justice in the 20th century, in the early part of the 20th century, wrote that states can serve as policy laboratories for public policy experimentation. So, for example, in your notes, it says that Wyoming was the first state to give women the right to vote. California pioneered workmen's compensation law. Wisconsin pioneered welfare reform. The state of Colorado was the first to legalize recreational marijuana, for example. And so ideas that seem to make sense get stolen. So Oregon pioneered deposits on bottles and cans, and now almost every state has those things. Wyoming was the first to give women the right to vote. Now women can vote in every state. There's workmen's compensation in every state. Wisconsin's welfare reform was something that Bill Clinton kind of stole and went nationwide with his Welfare Reform Act. A lot of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal policies he had tried while being governor of New York, for example. Some ideas don't work. They're not copied by other states. Other states take one look at it and say, I'm not going to do that. A good example of that would be in 15 of the 18 counties in the state of Nevada, prostitution's legal. But prostitution is not legal in any other state in the Union. There are some states where very few, for example, if any of you have ever driven up to Oregon and you've needed gasoline, right? An attendant comes out and fills your gas tank for you. That's mandated by state law. I believe New Jersey also has that law, but to my knowledge, those are the only two states that have that. When I was a young child, drinking ages varied throughout the states. For example, the state of New York had a drinking age of 18 and New Jersey 21. So you can guess what teenagers in New Jersey did. They drove in their cars from New Jersey across the bridge to New York, got intoxicated, and tried to drive home, sometimes with absolutely disastrous results. In both states blamed the other for that phenomenon. So states can try things. If they work, other states will copy. If it seemingly doesn't work, it won't be copied, and there are a lot of examples of that. The third advantage of federalism that Sharkansky and Walker point out is there is greater citizen access at the local level, and there's no question that this is true. If you and I wanted to go back to Washington, D.C. and speak to the president or speak to a congressional committee, the people in Washington, except for our representative, might say, where's Merced, or where's Turlock, or where's Atwater, or Delhi, or Riverbank, or whatever town. They might know Modesto because it's a pretty good sized city, or Fresno, it's a pretty good sized city. But for the most part, we probably wouldn't get any action. On the other hand, if you and I were to go to a Merced County Board of Supervisors meeting, or a Stanislaus County Board of Supervisors meeting, or a Merced or Turlock City Council meeting, a group our size would scare the heck out of the elected officials. They would wonder, why had they messed up so badly that all of these people have come to our meeting? You see, when I look at pluralism, I think of the game of baseball, and I don't know how many of you are baseball fans in here, but baseball, from a hitter's perspective, is a game of failure. A 300 hitter is considered a very good hitter. A 300 hitter means that they successfully get a hit 30% of the time. It means 70% of the time they make an out. Well, I think that in many ways, politics are the same way. It's a game of failure. Our political system is very conservative. It's very status quo oriented. And the result is that even really powerful interest groups make more outs than they get hits. It is far easier in our political system to kill legislation than it is to get it passed. But the way that I look at both of them, right, is that in both pluralism and in baseball, you need access. And in baseball, the way you get access is a plate appearance. You get up off the bench, you grab a bat. Your odds of making an out are higher than making a hit, but the only way you're going to get a hit is to have access and go up there and hit. And in pluralism, it's the same way. The only way that an interest group is going to have success is if they get access. They get that plate appearance. And so a lot of people ask me, well, does money buy you votes? Yeah, occasionally. There are crooks out there. One of my favorite old videos of the past from many, many years ago in California politics was Paul Carpenter was an assemblyman. And there were FBI agents who were doing a sting, acting like they were interest group lobbyists. And they were offering Carpenter large sums of money in cash to sponsor a piece of legislation. And Carpenter is stuffing his pockets full of money. And at one point, he starts laughing and he points at a camera, at a mirror. And he says, "Boy, I hope there's not a camera behind that mirror because this is a felony." Well, unfortunately for him, there was a camera behind the mirror and it was a felony and he went to jail. So, yes, there are crooks, but not very many. Our system is one in which there are a lot of legal ways to have money funneled through campaigns and political action committees. And frankly, there are a lot of ways to get access without directly bribing somebody. And think about it and be truthful here. Don't act what should be. Think about what is. So let's say that you are a congressman or even a state assemblyman, and you're in your office, and it's 10 minutes before you have to go cast a vote. And there's a constituent there on behalf of a public interest group that's underfinanced, and they're there trying to do the right thing for, say, consumers. And then you have a lobbyist from a company that contributed several $1,000s to your campaign. And they both want that 10 minutes of your time, and they're both in your waiting room. Who gets access? If you say that the person who contributed because they helped you get elected, that's probably the right answer. And that doesn't make you a bad person, but it makes you egoistic. And I want you to think about something. I could be a congressperson and have all of the best intentions in the world, but if I don't get reelected, if I lose, then I cannot do anything for my constituents or my people. So when you say that you would allow the person in there who's helping you get reelected, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're crooked. It might be, you might be crooked, but you also might be self-interested and you might be involved in a close reelection battle. And if you really do have good intentions, and if you really do want to sponsor legislation on behalf of those people, you got to get reelected. So don't think that because you as an elected official take care of the people who get you elected, that it's a horrific thing. Now, sometimes it is. And if you are only pandering to people who give you money, then that's wrong, because as an elected official, you should represent everyone. And in an ideal world, you would listen to both that business lobbyist and you would have time for that consumer activist. I used 10 minutes, and that's fairly rare, just to illustrate that sometimes you can't do the right thing. Sometimes you're forced to make a choice. And some might argue that if you just brought in the consumer advocate and you didn't bring in, say, a business interest that employs a lot of people in your community, you might also be shortchanging your constituent. So in federal systems, you do tend to see more diversity, and you can think about all kinds of ways in which our states vary. Federal systems do tend to be more innovative. States often are policy labs, and when they do things that seem to work, not only do other states pass it, but often it goes national and becomes part, say, of the Constitution. Women getting the right to vote became a constitutional amendment. Georgia was the first state to give 18-year-olds the right to vote. A constitutional amendment gave 18-year-olds the right to vote. And I do believe that in federal systems, people like you and I more likely have access than in a unitary system. Next time, we will talk about the disadvantages of federalism.